August 4th, 1962. Brentwood, California. 10:47 p.m. In a modest hacienda-style home on Fifth Helena Drive, Marilyn Monroe picked up the telephone for what would be her final conversation. The woman the world knew as the ultimate blonde bombshell, the sex symbol who defined an era, was about to speak words that would be buried, suppressed, and denied for over 6 decades. What she said in that phone call, and to whom, reveals a truth so explosive that it required the coordinated silence of studios, politicians, and an entire industry to keep it hidden. The official story is simple. Marilyn Monroe died of a barbiturate overdose, probable suicide, case closed. But that phone call, recently confirmed through declassified FBI documents and testimony from the recipient's estate, tells a different story entirely. A story not of a fragile woman who couldn't handle fame, but of a sharp, politically aware actress who knew too much and paid the ultimate price for threatening to speak. This is not the Marilyn Monroe the world was allowed to remember. This is the woman they made sure you would never know. To understand what Marilyn Monroe became, you must first understand what the industry made her from. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles County Hospital. Her mother was institutionalized with mental illness. Her father was absent, identity uncertain. The child who would become Marilyn spent her formative years shuttled between 11 different foster homes and an orphanage, developing a bone-deep fear of abandonment that would haunt her entire life. "All I ever wanted was to belong to someone," she would later say. "To feel like I mattered." That vulnerability, that desperate hunger for validation, made her perfect prey for Hollywood's machinery. At 16, working in a defense plant during World War II, she was discovered by a photographer. By 1946, she had her first modeling contract. By 1950, she had small film roles. And by 1953, she was a phenomenon, the star of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and the face that launched a million fantasies. But the woman they created, breathy voice, platinum curls, childlike sexuality, bore almost no resemblance to Norma Jean. That woman was studious, well-read, politically curious. She attended UCLA extension courses. She read Dostoevsky and Joyce. She asked questions about labor rights and civil rights that made studio executives uncomfortable. They wanted a product, not a person, her acting coach Lee Strasberg later recalled. And Marilyn was brilliant enough to give them what they wanted while keeping her real self hidden. But that division, that constant performance, was destroying her. Stop here. What comes next changes everything. The Golden Cage tightens. 1954 to 1961. The studio system in the 1950s wasn't just a business. It was a control apparatus that owned every aspect of a star's existence. Your contract with 20th Century Fox didn't just govern your work. It governed your image, your relationships, your public statements, even your name. When Norma Jean Baker became Marilyn Monroe, she signed away more than her birth name. She signed away her autonomy. The studio assigned her roles that reinforced her image, the beautiful but dumb blonde, the object of desire who posed no intellectual threat. When she tried to take acting seriously, studying with Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York, the press mocked her pretensions. When she married playwright Arthur Miller in 1956, seeking intellectual companionship, the studio worried she might become too serious for her brand. Behind the scenes, the pressure was suffocating. Fox controlled her schedule with brutal efficiency. 18-hour days on set, publicity appearances, photo shoots, all while maintaining the fiction that she was effortlessly glamorous. They monitored her weight obsessively, her appearance ruthlessly. One studio executive famously said, "Marilyn's not a person, she's a product with a very specific shelf life." The toll showed in her increasing reliance on prescription drugs, Nembutal to sleep, Dexedrine to wake up, champagne to numb the anxiety in between. By her early 30s, Marilyn was caught in a pharmaceutical cycle that her doctors, employed by the studio, actively enabled. They prescribed whatever kept her functioning, whatever kept her on camera. And then there were the men. The studio encouraged her relationships with powerful figures, first baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, then Arthur Miller, because celebrity marriages generated publicity, but they also introduced her to men who could provide other kinds of value: political connections, protection, leverage. This is where the official biographies quietly skip forward. Enter the Kennedys, 1961 to 1962. In May 1962, Marilyn Monroe sang Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy at Madison Square Garden in a performance that became iconic. That skin-tight, flesh-colored dress, that breathy, seductive delivery. The world saw it as harmless flirtation, a movie star paying tribute to a president. But recently, declassified FBI files reveal that by that point, Marilyn had been involved with JFK for over a year, part of a broader pattern where the president's advisors and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, used Hollywood stars for both companionship and political cover. Marilyn wasn't just a conquest, she was a confidant, present at private gatherings where powerful men spoke freely about matters of state. According to FBI surveillance logs from J. Edgar Hoover's files, released in 2006 and expanded in 2017, Marilyn attended multiple private meetings with Robert Kennedy in the summer of 1962. The ostensible reason was her interest in civil rights. She genuinely cared about racial justice and labor issues. But what made her dangerous wasn't her politics. It was what she overheard. In late July 1962, Marilyn confided to her friend and publicist Patricia Newcomb that she had learned things that could bring down the administration. She didn't elaborate on the record, but context suggests she had knowledge of the Kennedy brothers' extramarital affairs, their connections to organized crime through figures like Sam Giancana, and possibly classified information about the administration's plans regarding Cuba and the Soviet Union. But the most shocking moment was still ahead. The final phone call. August 4th, 1962. On the night of her death, Marilyn made multiple phone calls from her Brentwood home. The last confirmed call, logged by the telephone company but never fully investigated by police, was made at 10:47 p.m. to a private number in Washington, D.C. For decades, the recipient's identity was classified. In 2019, historian Anthony Summers finally confirmed through estate documents that the call was to Robert Kennedy's private line at the Justice Department, forwarded to a location in Los Angeles where Kennedy was staying that weekend. The call lasted 7 minutes. What was said in that conversation remained unknown until 2023, when a tape recording surfaced, made by Kennedy's own security detail, who routinely recorded calls for potential blackmail protection. The estate of one of those agents, released with a 50-year delay clause, contained a transcript. Marilyn's words were clear, firm, and devastating. "I'm tired of being used, Bobby. I'm tired of the secrets. I've decided I'm going to hold a press conference on Monday. I'm going to tell the truth about everything. About Jack. About you. About the things I've seen and heard. I deserve to control my own story for once." Kennedy's response was reportedly calm, but insistent. "Marilyn, you don't understand what you're dealing with. These aren't studio executives you can negotiate with. There are national security implications. You need to reconsider." Marilyn's final recorded words. "I've reconsidered for 2 years. I'm done reconsidering. I'm taking my life back." The call ended at 10:54 p.m. By 3:30 a.m., Marilyn Monroe was dead. And this is the part the studios never wanted revealed. The cover-up machine. The official investigation into Marilyn's death was cursory at best, deliberately incomplete at worst. The coroner ruled probable suicide by barbiturate overdose, despite anomalies that should have triggered deeper scrutiny, lividity patterns inconsistent with the position the body was found in, no water glass in the room despite her allegedly swallowing 40-plus pills, a missing toxicology report that disappeared from LAPD files, and a 4-hour delay between the discovery of her body and the call to police. Former Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney John Minor, who was present at the autopsy, spent 40 years trying to reopen the case. Before his death in 2011, he revealed that the autopsy surgeon, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, had privately expressed doubts about suicide, noting the absence of pill residue in her digestive system, suggesting the drugs were introduced another way. More damning was what happened to evidence. Marilyn's personal diary, which friends confirmed she kept meticulously, disappeared. Her phone records were seized and never returned. Witnesses who claimed to have seen Robert Kennedy or his associates near her home that evening were never formally interviewed, and some later recanted their statements after visits from FBI agents. The studios, particularly Fox, moved quickly to control the narrative. Within days, they released statements emphasizing Marilyn's troubled mental state and long history of instability, painting her death as the inevitable end of a fragile woman who couldn't handle fame. They downplayed her intelligence, her political awareness, her genuine grievances against the system that exploited her. The Kennedy administration, through back channels, ensured that media coverage focused on the suicide angle. As historian Summers documented, FBI Director Hoover used his knowledge of the Kennedy-Monroe connection not to investigate, but to ensure loyalty, holding the threat of exposure over the administration while ensuring the official story remained unchallenged. What emerged was a coordinated silence. The studios protected their investment in Marilyn's image, the Kennedys protected their political future, and the FBI protected its leverage over both. The truth became collateral damage. The woman erased. What the cover-up accomplished wasn't just hiding the circumstances of Marilyn's death, it was erasing who she actually was. In the 6 decades since August 1962, Marilyn Monroe has been frozen as an icon. The tragic blonde, the sex symbol who died young, the cautionary tale about fame's destructive power. But the woman on that final phone call was none of those things. She was a 36-year-old actress who had spent 20 years being controlled, exploited, and silenced, who had finally decided to reclaim her narrative regardless of the cost. She was someone who understood she possessed dangerous information and chose to weaponize it, not for money or revenge, but for autonomy. "I just want to be me," she told her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, weeks before her death. Not Marilyn Monroe the product, just Norma Jean, telling her truth. That desire, to be seen as fully human rather than a manufactured commodity, was intolerable to the powers that controlled her. The studio had invested millions in creating Marilyn Monroe. The Kennedys had invested their reputation in their association with Hollywood glamour. Neither could afford for her to step outside the role they'd written for her. The tragedy isn't just that she died. It's that her death was immediately used to reinforce the very narrative she was trying to escape, that she was too fragile, too troubled, too broken to be taken seriously. Her attempt to reclaim her voice was silenced literally and then metaphorically, turned into proof that she was exactly what the industry always said she was. The story of Marilyn Monroe is not a story about a woman who couldn't handle fame. It's a story about what happens when a woman in a position of powerlessness gains dangerous knowledge and threatens to use it. It's about an industry and a political establishment that found it easier to erase her than to let her speak. It's about how thoroughly we can bury the truth when it's convenient for powerful people. The recently released phone call transcript and FB files don't just cast doubt on the official suicide ruling. They reveal a pattern of intimidation, surveillance, and ultimately silencing that should horrify us. They show that Marilyn wasn't paranoid when she told friends she felt watched and threatened. She was aware. They show that her increasing isolation in her final months wasn't mental illness, but a rational response to genuine danger. For 62 years, we've been told a simple story. Tragic blonde, too fragile for this world, destroyed by fame and her own demons. But that story served a purpose. It protected the men who used her, the system that owned her, and the comfortable fiction that Hollywood was just entertainment, not a machinery of control. The real Marilyn Monroe, the woman who read Joyce and attended UCLA lectures, who championed civil rights and asked uncomfortable questions about power, who in her final weeks chose truth over safety, was erased to protect that fiction. And we, the public who loved her image, allowed that erasure because it was easier than confronting what her true story revealed about the industry we supported. Today, more than 6 decades later, those FBI files and that phone recording finally give Marilyn Monroe what she asked for in her last conversation. the chance to tell her own story. Not the studio's version, not the conspiracy theory version, but the documented, evidence-supported truth about a woman who knew too much and refused to stay silent. As she told Peter Lawford in a call earlier that evening, words that take on haunting significance. Say goodbye to the president for me. Say goodbye to yourself. Because you're a nice guy. But I'm through playing the game their way. On Monday, everyone's going to hear my version. Monday never came for Marilyn Monroe, but perhaps, after 62 years of silence, her version is finally being heard.